Hi, Mollie.
How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing well. I am back from a very long hiatus from doing Blogging Heads, owing to my summer travel schedule, which was both work and pleasure. But it's nice to be back and have you with me today. So, Mollie, you write for Get Religion and the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, I write at Get Religion, and we just had a move to the religion portal, which is called Patheos, and we are enjoying it quite a bit. We've only been there a week or so, and nice new readers and new community there. It's kind of an interfaith religion portal, and we're part of the new, it's an interfaith religious website, and we're part of the new news and culture portal that they have there. And,
so it seems like they've brought a lot of new stuff over there recently, not just you guys.
Yeah, they have. And I kind of feel like they're the Borg. They're just assimilating anyone religious. Like, it's just, someday we'll all be there. And,
I don't know about that.
I don't know. I mean, it just, it seems to be expanding quite a bit there, but.
Well, good. Well, that's where everyone can find Mollie, and you can, of course, find me at Religion Dispatches and Salon. So let's talk about the Republican convention, which will pretty much dominate our conversation today, but the Republican convention and religion. So there's been a lot of leaking, speculation, planned leaking that Mitt Romney is going to talk a lot more about his Mormon faith at the convention this week. I think in an effort to make him seem more like a human. What have you heard about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're saying that it's gonna be a prominent part of the convention, and I think that's really interesting because obviously this has not been something he's been either comfortable talking about or he just decided it wasn't very savvy to talk about it. But I think that one of the reasons why it's probably a good idea is that when he does talk about his Mormon faith, he actually gets very animated. He's very genuine. You can tell this is something he cares about deeply. And that is a good way to help connect with someone, is if you see that they care about something very deeply. And so I think that's the advantage to it. Obviously, it's a high-risk endeavor in some ways, in that there are a lot of people who disagree with Mormon religious teachings. But I think polls have shown that the more people know that Mitt Romney is Mormon and the more they know about it, even if they disagree with those teachings, the more comfortable they are with voting for him.
Well, I agree that the polling has showed that, but do you think that polling reflects the views of most RNC delegates?
Well, I think it's one thing that's very subtle, this very subtle nuance that has to be dealt with there, is that people, I think these types of delegates, and if we're talking about the religious right type delegates, they can easily vote for someone who doesn't share their religious faith. What they resent is being told that there are no distinctions between their religion and someone else's. So if someone comes along and says oh, Mitt Romney, he's just like you, they're like, no, actually I care deeply about these things and his views are different than mine. If someone says, okay, as he did actually in that commencement speech he gave at Liberty, you and I have pretty important religious differences, however, we share these values and we have a common goal, then people feel more comfortable voting for him. They don't feel like they're taking away something from their deeply held religious convictions if they understand, again, these are sort of clear terms. There's a clear understanding of where these people differ and where they don't. And I think that's the needle that has to be threaded by Romney and the convention team.
Well, I doubt very much that he's going to get into the specifics of Mormon theology and where it differs from evangelicalism on, its teachings on a variety of theological subjects that we don't need to get into, really. My understanding is that he's going to talk about the community that he served as a lay bishop in Boston, when he did serve as a lay bishop, which is the way the LDS Church works. So I think for some people, some evangelicals who may have lingering questions about the theology, it won't answer those questions, but it, I think, is obviously aimed at making Mormonism seem more familiar in a sort of civic religion kind of way to people.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be controversial. I think that most of the most of the problems people have with Mormonism are not about Mormons as people or the good work that they've done or do. It's usually doctrinal. They have different ideas about who God is, or the nature of God, and both strong Mormons and strong traditional Christians would say that they understand these differences. But talking about how you helped a family down the road who was in need, that's something that people can identify with, whether they're Jewish or Christian or Mormon or Muslim. Anyone can identify with how religious communities come together, whether they're liberal religious communities or conservative religious communities. People like that, I think, about religious communities, even if they have doctrinal differences within those communities.
Well, it was less than a year ago when the big controversy arose when that pastor from Texas, Robert Jeffress, who was supporting Rick Perry, this seems like a billion years ago, right? Said that he thought that Mormonism was a cult and so on and so forth. And I feel like the Republican base has moved a long distance from that. But I think it has a lot to do with wanting to beat Obama and feeling that they need to coalesce behind the Republican nominee in order to do that, even if they do have these lingering doctrinal questions, doubts, prejudices. So I think that drove it a lot, but I wonder if it will just serve to get them to the same place anyway. In other words, it will get them to be nonchalant about Mormonism, that they don't really care.
What I'm kind of curious about is traditionally the evangelical part of the base has had trouble distinguishing, in my view, between who their political leaders are and who their spiritual leaders are. And obviously this is not a problem that's just on the right. There are people on the left who have this problem too with even the current president. But what I'm curious about is whether they will be able to understand that this is someone who they are seeking out as a political leader without transforming him into a spiritual leader. Because that's been something that hasn't been done very well by the evangelical part of the base in the past.
Well, I think it's because they have so focused on a demand that political candidates express their faith in a way that meets a certain set of requirements for them, and that Mitt Romney could not meet, and that somebody who wasn't evangelical could not meet. But when you think about it, here, he's picked Paul Ryan as a running mate, who's a Catholic, and so for the first time in ever, the Republican ticket does not have a Protestant on it.
I know.
And there was a time when evangelicals were suspicious of Catholics, and now it's Paul Ryan made them more comfortable with Mitt Romney. So the Catholic made them more comfortable with the Mormon.
Well, I think there's kind of a story here too, which is that mainline Protestantism has seen many better days, to put it mildly. Mainline Protestantism is a shrinking percentage of the population, and then evangelicals are still trying to rise through the ranks of the power structures and whatnot. So there's just this weird time in American history where you can't go through the normal Episcopal channels or whatever people did previously, and yet the evangelicals might not quite be ready to put forth enough candidates that you have a Protestant on every Republican ticket.
Well, it's interesting. I'm trying to I'm running through my mind of potential, evangelical running mates for Romney, and it's not like they're absent. There are plenty of evangelicals who are in a position where they could have been chosen as a running mate. Tim Pawlenty, Nikki Haley.
Right.
But there's probably a dozen people I'm not thinking of at the moment. Do you think that given the battles over the quote-unquote war on religion and the HHS mandate and all of that picking a Catholic was part of the game plan, purposely part of the game plan?
Yeah, I think that is actually a huge part of the pick that very few people in the media have realized yet, which is that the big animating issue for religious voters who are Republican has to be freedom of religion issues. I mean, that's something that's uniting people all across the religious spectrum, but particularly on the right, who are very concerned about the HHS mandate and how it affects religious liberty. And Paul Ryan obviously has a lot of strengths when it comes to the economy, the budget, and the fiscal conservative issues. But he's actually, as a strong Catholic, he's someone who understands this religious liberty fight, and I think he's very well positioned to speak on it in a way that resonates with the religious Republican voters. And for all intents and purposes, because of this particular issue that's going on right now, whether you're Jewish or Catholic or Protestant, this is something that all these groups are kind of caring about right now in a unified way. And so it doesn't really matter where in those groups you are. The religious voters, I think, will respond favorably to that, the religious Republican voters.
But, so Mike Huckabee, I think, was the one who first coined the phrase, with regard to this particular issue, we're all Catholics now. And Romney has repeated,
I find that very frustrating because, of course, without the Catholics, we wouldn't have even been in this situation since they were so strongly advocating for the Obamacare legislation. So I have a little bit longer memory than Mike Huckabee does. But yes, that's the phrase. And we're all Catholics now. And everybody likes to say it. We're all Catholics now.
Right, and Romney says it.
Yeah, even though, when you look at the
will there come a day when we're saying we're all Mormons now?
What was that?
Will there come a day where everybody's saying we're all Mormons now?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like I was going to make a marriage joke, but it's too.
So let's backtrack for a minute for what you just said about the healthcare stuff. So you're basically saying that conservatives wouldn't be having an issue with the contraception coverage right now if Catholics hadn't advocated for the healthcare reform bill in the first place?
You might recall that bill was deeply unpopular and passed over the widespread and popular opposition of the people. And one of the ways that it kept on having energy to go is, yes, there was feeble opposition from the bishops who were like, we don't like this one part of it. But generally, Catholics from top on down have been pushing for universal health care coverage for decades. And so they are, responsible for at least part of the mess that we're in when it comes to, whoopsie, universal health care now all of a sudden has these things we don't like. I just find it funny that we're all rushing to help the Catholics when they were so prominent in the fight for passing this legislation. And, again, very popular on the left, but overall very unpopular with the American public, or at least a majority of Americans have consistently shown that they are not in favor of this legislation.
So you think that the evangelicals rushing to the side of the Catholics is just what? I mean, you don't think that's a genuine?
No, it's totally genuine. I just don't like the construction of we're all Catholics now. Yes, I understand that this is a particular issue for Catholics, and so we all rush, which actually has happened, again, on left and right when it comes to religious liberty battles. People have always helped out people who they don't share doctrinal similarities with, because they can see that if you go out
here you're saying it's not just doctrinal differences, but political differences over whether there should be health care.
Well, no, on this particular point, even religious bodies that have no opposition to contraception, including a lot of evangelical church bodies, know that they have to help fight this battle for the Catholics because they do. And of course, the mandate is broad enough that it does cause some problems for Protestants as well in terms of some of the drugs that are required there.
Those drugs are emergency contraception, which the FDA does not classify as abortion-inducing.
Well, so I mean, if we're talking about Ella, obviously there are religious groups that do not like how it has a function of preventing implantation of a fertilized egg. My church body would be one of those. And it doesn't matter whether you don't think that's an abortion drug. What matters is whether we think that's an abortion drug and whether we should be compelled to do something that violates, whatever you call what's happening there. This function that the drug performs is something that my church body opposes. So we would not want to be forced to fund these things in our health insurance plans. But anyway, the point being, this is a mandate that targets all sorts of religious believers. Yes, Catholics are most prominent, and the media have been portraying this as a Catholic-only issue, no matter how many evangelical or Protestant schools or organizations also join in the fight. But I just remember that I just remember a little bit of the history here too.
Well, I mean, do you think that this is this is sort of an interesting issue, the whole question of what constitutes Catholic social justice teaching as it plays into, questions about the economy or healthcare and that sort of thing, because that's been an issue for Paul Ryan. So the question of, does his budget proposal betray Catholic social justice teaching? And there are a lot of Catholics, notwithstanding the fact that he's pretty much gotten a stamp of approval from his own bishop, the Archbishop of Madison. But there are a lot of Catholics who think that it directly contravenes Catholic social justice teaching. So I think within Catholicism, there's more of a debate or more diversity of opinion on that, whereas I think evangelicals tend to be a little bit more monolithic in their views that the government should be small and provide minimum or no social safety net, that should be provided by churches. I don't see that debate going on within evangelicalism like it does within Catholicism.
Yeah.
The question of what the government's responsibility is in providing a social safety net and so on.
I think that's kind of a problem among evangelicals in that they have been so identified politically as opposed to sacramentally that they break up along political lines. And that's, so there are liberal evangelical groups and conservative evangelical groups, but they're very political. Whereas the Catholic Church is like, whatever you are, you're bound together more in the life of the church, the sacraments. And so you're going to have a much broader array of political views, I think. And I think that's actually to the Catholic Church's credit that way, that you can have these vigorous debates about precisely what the best way to take care of the poor is. Even if you all agree that you need to take care of the poor, do you do it through this government program? What if it's been determined very ineffective? What are the best solutions for fixing the ineffective nature of that program? Is government the right agency anyway? There are a lot of these like really vigorous and healthy debates about these issues. But you don't quite see those in a lot of evangelical settings, although it's happening more now, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because on the one hand, in Catholicism, you have the Vatican, you have a church hierarchy which lays down the doctrinal law, yet you have a much more vigorous debate, at least among lay Catholics. I don't think that there's a vigorous debate necessarily going on within the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops as much as it is going on among American Catholics themselves. But you have a much more vigorous debate on this question than you have among evangelicals who don't have the same structure or hierarchy, which, laying down the word from on high. And so why is that? Like, why are evangelicals more opposed to government providing these social services or a social safety net or healthcare or what have you more monolithically than Catholics are? I'm talking rank and file Catholics, not Catholic hierarchy.
One of the things I think might come into play is they might be more results oriented. Like, they see that government programs don't do a very good job of helping people, so they care more about the outcome than the intentions. Whereas
but when you talk to evangelicals, when you talk to grassroots folks who are at least a little bit political, they're not even thinking about it in those terms. They are thinking about it much more in terms of a kind of gut reaction to what they call big government, or a gut reaction to. I don't see a lot of people pulling. I mean, when I talk to people, I don't see them giving me metrics on whether government programs work or not.
I think there might be a religious component, though, in that when evangelicals talk a lot about personal relationship with Jesus Christ. When they hear, some biblical edict about taking care of the poor, they think of that as a personal commandment. The Catholic Church is by definition quite institutional, so they think more institutionally about fixing problems. Or so when they hear like feed the poor, they think, oh, let's start this government program. I mean, I'm not saying all of them, obviously, and it's like gross generalization, but I think there might be some kind of subtext there, component, where the personal relationship with Jesus versus the institutional relationship might come into play.
Well, do you think, so there's been this whole debate about Paul Ryan and his budget and his affection for Ayn Rand, notwithstanding the fact that she was very anti-religion.
A little bit.
I mean, I never, but I never got the sense. I felt like his Catholic justification for his budget. So first, what happened? He proposed the budget, and then there was this. This was a year ago, or more than a year ago, the spring of 2011. And there were a group of, I think John Boehner was giving a commencement speech at a Catholic university, or maybe at the Catholic university.
Catholic,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a group of Catholic academics who wrote, a fairly big group, who wrote a letter to him complaining that Ryan's budget and basically the entire agenda of the House GOP was in contravention of Catholic social justice teaching. And
the same people who are very silent on life issues somehow got together to write this letter.
I don't know. I don't think that all of them were silent on life issues.
Not all of them, but like most of them. It was just it was a very political document. And then are you talking about how he responded with the subsidiarity argument?
Well, no, but yes, and then they wanted to get some backup from the bishops, and I think Boehner wrote a letter to now Cardinal Dolan, and but it seemed to me, getting back to Ryan's Catholicism, and after the fact attempt at justifying his budget, that he hadn't really. It's not like Paul Ryan brought out his budget and said, here's my budget, and I've really thought a lot about it in the context of my Catholicism, and here's why it lines up with that. It seemed like an after-the-fact thing, after the criticism. And so it
You say that like it's a bad thing. I mean, I think that you and I are probably in agreement that people should just put forth like the most effective budget that they imagine without resorting to religious arguments. But
I think we definitely agree on that, right? But it was just interesting because I don't really, it's hard to tell whether he actually had ever considered it in the context of his Catholic teaching or not. But now there's an effort to make it seem like it conforms with Catholic teaching, which has angered a lot of Catholics who think that it doesn't.
I don't know. I mean, I would just assume that everyone, no matter how extreme they are one way or the other, would be informed when they're doing a budget by their religious and philosophical understandings and math and other things. And so it would all be part of like this, it would be all part of the background going into how they developed a budget. But I don't think religion is very prominent in Paul Ryan's budget. I think math is very prominent. I think that he, just looks at like limited resources and what's coming in money-wise and what's coming out. And so I don't think that's bad, but I actually agree with you. I think it was probably more like, hey, here's the Catholic defense for this, not like, I'm going to write this as a Catholic. Here's my Catholic budget.
I also remember that when he was first put out there by the conservative movement as this wonderkind, sort of the next great phase of Republican government, it was at CPAC, and it was very much oriented towards economic issues. And now I think you have the religious right. I think he's going to be speaking at the Values Voters Summit next month. And so now you have the religious right saying, oh, and this too, he's a great champion of our issues also. But in the early days of Paul Ryan's rising celebrity, let me say, I never got the sense that he was being marketed as a religious conservative at all.
No, but he has always been a very consistent pro-life vote. There's not like you're going to see his greatest inconsistencies have been on economic issues. Some of the things he was forced to vote for under the Bush administration. He's always been very consistent on social issues. And I think that it's not like anyone's been confused about whether he's one of them or one of the other group. And in fact,
which is probably another reason why Romney wanted him.
Yeah. You think Mitt Romney had a little bit of ground to shore up there on his social conservative creds? Yes.
Well, on the consistency cred.
Yeah. I'm sorry, this is like my favorite thing. I live here in Northern Virginia, and we're getting these ads from the Romney campaign, which are designed to make people not vote for Romney. I'm sorry, ads from the Obama campaign, and they're designed to turn people against Romney. And I'm someone who's pro-life and is very nervous about how inconsistent Mitt Romney has been on that issue, to put it as kindly as I can. But these videos come out, or these commercials come out, and they're like, Mitt Romney will take away a woman's right to choose. No man has been more extremist on abortion than Mitt Romney. And I'm like, this is precisely what Mitt Romney probably needs to shore up the pro-life vote, is someone accusing him of extremism in defense of life, which is something...
Except that most people who fall into that camp don't think that Obama is truthful, so anyway.
Yeah, I know, but I still think it's funny, like, no man is more extremist. Really? And also they lie in the ads and say that he wants to ban abortion in all cases, which is not true. I'm sure PolitiFact will get right on that.
Well, let's use that as I wanted to talk a little bit before we close out about, if we're not done collectively talking about Todd Akin. Now, my view of the whole Todd Akin thing was that, I think somebody else put it this way, he was the man who said too much. He said
too much too wrong, but okay.
Right. Too much what?
Too much too wrong.
You mean for his career?
No, I'm just saying he said something that wasn't true. So it's not about saying too much. It's about saying something that was incorrect and doesn't represent the actual views of the pro-life movement on, even like consistent pro-lifers who think that abortion is always wrong no matter the circumstances of the conception.
Right. But he wasn't pulling this out of thin air. I mean, there are people... John Wilkie, for example, who
I found that really interesting to find that there was
promoted this idea that there is this, I can't remember what the phrase was, but this special thing that the women's body
resistance.
Does. Yeah. So he didn't make it up, but it represented some corner of the movement that was embarrassing.
Well, it's a very difficult thing to be consistently pro-life, even on cases like that. I mean, even though it's not something that happens very often, these are the, when consent is not an issue in the conception, in the sex that leads to conception, that's a very difficult position to take. And it would be so easy if we could pretend like it doesn't happen. And I guess that's what Todd Akin wanted to do. But that doesn't, what else can be said about it? The guy said what he said. He's been roundly criticized, and he's, I guess we'll see how things go for his campaign.
So, do you really think that the Republican Party is ready to turn its back on its members who say embarrassing things?
Well,
people other than Todd Akin, Michelle Bachmann, who said that Gardasil causes mental retardation, for example.
I mean, every political party has idiots who say stupid things, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast that you're going to have people say really extreme or stupid things and be part of your party. I think a party that does best is probably Big Tent. There's obviously, there are times when you do have to strongly repudiate what someone said. I think the Todd Akin example, you had literally like everybody coming out except for Mike Huckabee saying how horrible it was and wrong and stupid. It's almost actually seems like it's almost gone overboard. And it's like, yes, we get the point. Nobody agrees with what Todd Akin said. And, the media obviously have really wanted to make this like a 28 story a day thing. And they understand that it's very helpful to Democrats and Democrats understand it's very helpful to them. And so we keep on seeing this story push, but I don't think that it needs to be made like that big of a production. Joe Biden barely remembers to put his pants on every day, and he's our vice president. You can't repudiate every idiot.
What's your basis for saying he barely remembers to put his pants on?
That's that's just my conception of what his days are like. He's just so, he just says stupid stuff like every single day, as I'm sure you've heard.
Well, Akin, I think, has a history of being a very outspoken representative of the religious right.
Really? I actually had never heard of him before his.
Really?
I mean, I heard of him during the primary, but I'm not religious right, so maybe that doesn't mean anything. But
right, and
I'd
well,
never
he was a Missouri congressman, so
right.
You live in Virginia, and maybe he didn't come across
I'm
your
the
radar
world's biggest
screen.
St. Louis Cardinals fan, though. So, and my mom's from Missouri. My mom's from Missouri, and I'm the world's biggest St. Louis Cardinals fan. But I mean, I knew he was like. During the primary, I learned he was a congressman in the general St. Louis area, I guess, and that he had a history of sometimes saying, some stuff that wasn't always completely well-spoken or whatnot. But I don't think he's like a leader by any stretch. Right?
Well, I think he's somebody that is considered
I get that the Democrats want him to be considered a leader. I get that. I just don't think there's any like actual backing for that.
Well, I think that he shows up in something like a prayer cast sort of webcast thing that the Family Research Council will host on some healthcare or abortion or something like that, and so I think that he's not to them he's not an obscure figure. He's an important figure, and to Mike Huckabee, he's somebody who needs to be defended, and to some other people, I guess, too, in addition to Mike Huckabee.
And I challenge you: has Mike Huckabee ever been right about anything? I'll put it that broadly. I mean, that guy. I mean, he's got a radio show to sell, and he's figured out a niche. People are talking more about Mike Huckabee this week than they have in months. He understands how this works.
I think Mike Huckabee has a pretty good following. He's not an inconsequential figure in the conservative movement or the religious right. So he's part, so that's like, it's not just Todd Akin that's part of the Republican Party. It's people who follow Mike Huckabee, who continue to work to push Mike Huckabee into the presidential race, even though he didn't end up doing that. People who, so it's. I don't think that Akin is this lone wolf. He has enough supporters that he won the Republican primary.
Yeah, but he didn't win with a majority. He won with I don't remember what the
statistic was,
but it was a three-way primary, and he didn't even pass 50% of the vote. It's going to be hard to convince people that this is like the big conservative leader when he can't even win a primary with a simple majority. I mean, that's just. He's not. I don't know. I understand why you want to talk about it. I understand why everybody wants to talk about it. It's obviously really good. It's helpful to the pro-choice cause. I get all that, but I don't
want to talk about it because it's helpful to the pro-choice cause. I want to talk about it because I find it interesting that what it takes to finally make Republicans feel nervous about some of the people within the party who have risen to a sufficient level of notoriety that they're the nominee for a Senate race.
Let's take someone on the other side, in the other party. You have a man who is actually currently the sitting president who fought something that even NARAL didn't fight in the Illinois state legislature, the Infants Born Alive Protection Act, or whatever that was called. He fought this. This would simply protect children who were born accidentally after an abortion. And no one fought it except for him. Like, you want extremists. He's so extreme on the abortion issue that he even, as someone joked, supports fourth trimester abortion. I mean, nobody talks about this. And this guy is the sitting president. And nobody talks about how he is so extreme on abortion, that his ideas on abortion, that there should be no restrictions on any abortion at all whatsoever. That's clearly a minority viewpoint among Americans. A majority of people think abortion should be limited in some or all cases. A majority of people identify as pro-life. And yet we're supposed to pretend that this guy is that Akin is some radical extremist who should be shot and put underground or whatnot. Yeah,
I didn't say that. Did I say that he should be shot?
I'm saying the over-the-top reaction to one side of the extreme, and not even mentioning this other extreme. It just shows so much bias in the way the media treat this issue. I know that the media are so into abortion and that they really are strongly supportive of it, but they are so extremist on it that they can't see where Americans actually are on this issue. Like, most of us self-identify as pro-life. Most of us think there should be restrictions on some or all abortions. And that's not the image that you get in the media when they're constantly drumming up, like, one side of the issue. Like, even you never see reporters ever ask a consistent pro-choice politician any tough questions, or you almost never do. You always see reporters like ad nauseum for decades, and now that Akin did this thing,
right
we're going to see decades more asking about rape and incest, which are less than 1% of all abortions, and yet you never see people ask pro-choice politicians, oh, so you really think it should be legal to kill a baby just because she's a girl? You really think it should be legal to kill a baby just because she has Down syndrome? You really think it should be legal to kill a baby moments on her way to the birth canal? Nobody ever asks those questions, and those are tough questions to answer too, but we only see one side of the issue and not the other.
First of all, okay, so abortion is legal, okay? And so it's the anti-choicers who are trying to change the status quo. And so,
yes, kind of like how traditional marriage is legal, and yet it's the people who want to change the definition of marriage. They want to change the status quo, but we see different ways of treating different groups.
We have different standards for this.
If you want to change the definition of marriage, well, then the onus is on the people who want to keep the definition of marriage. If you want to change abortion laws, well, then the onus is on you. I mean, it's not fair that we just pick and choose the way we treat these people.
Those are two very different things. Those are two different things. Yes, because...
You just said that, like, the whole reason is, like, these people want to change abortion law. But we don't see that same, like, really tough questioning of people who want to change marriage law. And I think we know why.
We do?
I think we know where the media sit on these issues, and that influences the way they handle these topics.
Well,
I mean, you have a better idea? I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me and the New York Times outgoing public editor, but maybe there are better theories out there.
I just think that you have this strange view that the media is somehow out of the main, that first of all, that the media has this bias, A, and that B, that if it does, that's somehow out of the mainstream of what Americans think. I mean, for the first time, we're seeing a slim majority of Americans saying that same-sex marriage should be legal. And the whole, self-definition, pro-love, pro-choice, is not a useful measurement of what Americans really think when it comes down to should there be restrictions on abortion or should there not be restrictions on abortion. Because those are definitions that have come to mean certain things to people or connote a certain thing. And there are other polls that show that there's a very big difference between what people say when you ask them to self-identify like that versus should there be restrictions on access to abortion. So, I don't think that the media has it out for people who identify as pro-life. I mean, Todd Akin did say a pretty wacky thing.
Yes, I know, and we're all going to talk about it till kingdom come. But it's also true that there are extremists on the other side of the issue who say wacky things and make it to very high places in office. And we never hear anybody talk about those things. I mean, there was...
We don't? You're talking about it right now.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think it would be good if we had reporters actually asking these consistent pro-choice politicians the exact same good and tough questions that we hear them ask of the other side.
So what would you have them ask?
What was that?
What would you have them ask?
Just like I said, ask. I mean, to be totally honest, I think that arguing from the extremes is not a really helpful thing. Like, take the abortions in the case of rape or incest. I mean, it's a very small percentage of the instances of abortion. And likewise, sex selection abortion or abortion for Down syndrome or partial birth abortion or late-term abortion, those are also not a big percentage of the instances of abortion. But if you're going to make the argument from the extreme or from the exception, then I think you should do it on both sides. And you just don't see that. You don't see that at all. And nobody ever has to answer tough questions when they are, consistently pro-choice. Or I haven't seen very many instances of it, I should say.
So, but do you think that reporters have been asking tough questions of people who are anti-choice?
I think that pro-lifers have had that question asked about rape or incest exceptions so much that is the biggest, most ridiculous thing about how much Akin flubbed that. I don't know how you could be a pro-lifer in this day and age and not be prepared for a question on rape and incest. I mean, it's one of the reasons why pro-lifers frequently just take it off the table. They're like willing to just give that portion of the debate away so that they can focus on the more general issues of whether unborn children should have their lives protected or whether we should have such an extreme abortion regime in this country, just because it's like such a predominant part of the debate for such a small percentage of what we're actually dealing with when we look at the abortion culture in this country.
So do you think that a woman who's been raped should not be allowed to have an abortion?
Is that really, like after all this, that's where you want to go with this?
Well,
I mean, who the heck cares what I think about this, first of all? But my whole point is that is what is making this debate so ridiculous, is that we, instead of talking about like the actual abortion culture that we have in this country, we like make it all about.
I don't know what you mean by abortion culture. What do you mean by
abortion culture? There are 1.4 million
culture?
abortions in this country every year. A lot of black kids get aborted. There's like a lot of problems with how many abortions are happening in this country. I think we can all agree that abortion is not what is the ideal scenario for women. There's clearly something going wrong when women are in this situation. And I think there's probably a lot of helpful avenues we could talk about. Not that I think that's my job. I mean, these are just my personal views. But I think that the discussion could be a lot better than this type of discussion. I think that we could all there are probably actually even areas where people have a lot of common ground in terms of reducing the situations where women feel that they need to have abortions or whatnot. What was that?
Like using contraception?
Well, I mean, more women use contraception now than ever before. Has that helped the abortion situation? Really? Like, contraception could not be more available. There could not be more access. Well, I guess there could be. Like force-fed to you or something. I mean, everyone knows there's contraception out there. And how is that working out for the abortion rate in this country? Like, it should be. If we were to believe the arguments of people, it should be that with the greater use of contraception and the greater knowledge about contraception and all sorts of things, that we should have a very low abortion rate. And that's not the case. Right?
There are many situations where people have contraception available to them, they don't use it, situations where it fails, situations where people are uneducated about how to use it. There are a lot of factors that go into that. So to call it an abortion culture, it's just such a weird statement.
Isn't it something like 40% of women will have had an abortion during their life or something?
I think it's 1 in 3.
Okay, but it's a lot. It's a lot of people. And unless you think that's a good thing, I think that there are probably a lot of avenues for discussing this that would be fruitful and not so partisan and inflamed and whatnot. I mean, there are a lot of women who are in bad situations, a lot of men and women, I should say. There are a lot of things that are not going quite ideally. And if we really care about women being able to raise the children that they conceive and, conceive when they should be in marriage or otherwise when they're able to take care of these children, things are not going quite right.
So do you think the election is still about the economy?
Actually, I kind of do. I don't know. I think that I was an old-time Mitch Daniels supporter, and I kind of liked his idea of just talking about the size and scope of government and putting social issues on the back burner. However, there's no avoiding social issues. I mean, culture is everything. And, right now we're in a very, very bad economy. I have family and friends who either were out of work for years or have been out of work for years. It's obviously a big issue. I mean, if you can't take care of your family, it's a very big threat to the family. Unemployment is staggering. Things are not getting better, at least in any noticeable way. Family income is down, consumer confidence is down. These things make it hard to not keep those. I mean, you just can't help but keep those things at the forefront of your mind when you're living in that kind of economy. Particularly outside of the Washington D.C. area, which seems to be doing just fine. But obviously, doesn't really matter how good the economy is if the culture has gone to hell either. So there's not really necessarily a conflict. What do you think?
Well, I think that for people who, have lost their job, or their family members or their neighbors or whoever have lost their job, or they're looking at how the heck am I going to pay to send my kid to college because it's so expensive and hard to get student loans, or, there's a whole host of economic issues that are facing people. I think that these other questions are not going to be at the forefront of their minds. I just think that if you're in bad economic straits, or people you love are in bad economic straits, you're going to be thinking about that first and foremost. Regardless of how a lot of conservatives think that culture is everything or the issues are intertwined, I think that most people, or at least most people who haven't, who might be considered a swing voter or an independent, however you want to phrase that, though it's that terminology doesn't really work that well for me. But in any case,
I like uninformed voters. No, just kidding.
Well, I don't think that they're necessarily uninformed. It's just that I don't know what to call them. The people who haven't made up their minds yet. I just don't think that those other issues are going to be that important to them if they're worried about their pocketbook issues.
So there's been all this talk about gender gap on voting, and a lot of people identify this incorrectly because they think that women all have the same ideas about abortion, which you and I could probably reveal not to be true. They think that this is all about like abortion or contraception or whatnot. But when you look at the data, actually, Romney is carrying married women by like 15 points or something, like just massive crushing of Obama when it comes to married women. And then Obama isn't doing as well as he did 4 years ago, but he still has like a sizable chunk of the single women. And so I think people still see those as culture issues, but I kind of think that might be more economy than anything. When you're single, when you're not part of like a family unit or whatnot, you might be more inclined to see like a bigger role for government than if you're married, and you see that more you see a smaller role for government. And so I think that people misread the gender gap all the time as primarily a social issue thing, when if you dig down into the data a little bit more, it looks more like an economic issue thing.
Well, I definitely think that people are more complicated than one issue. I mean,
Hey, if I learned anything from the Code Pink protest yesterday, we are all walking vaginas, right?
I'm not familiar with the protest you're talking about.
Oh my gosh! So down at the RNC, Code Pink, who are like some of my favorite, craziest protesters, thought it would be a good idea to walk around as vaginas, as female genitalia, to make a point about how obsessed they are with their vaginas, or how they want the government to be involved with their vaginas. I don't entirely know. I'm sure it made a lot of sense to them at the time, but yes. Women are more than just their vaginas, is what I would say.
Well, maybe that's a good place to end.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, Mollie. It was a good discussion,
thank you so much.
as usual.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.